We begin now with the core content of the module. This is section 2, corresponding to chapter 2 of the printed version, and this section is called the big picture. This section aims basically to summarize the global development debates in the context of the SDGs, review the nation's progress toward achieving the development goals, with the MDGs or the Millennium Development Goals as milestones, and to introduce the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs, which correspond to the years 2015 to 2030. In the run-up to the Sustainable Development Goals, there was work that was taking place in global discussions and debates. And one of the things that the global discussions and debates showed up was that while the progress on the Millennium Development Goals was substantial in terms of reducing poverty, in terms of reducing infant mortality, improving medical care, there was still a lot to be done in terms of gender equality and sustainable development. Therefore, the goals then began to focus upon what should be the agenda for the next 15 years. And emerging out of the Rio conference of 2010, global partners and all the countries began discussing the shape of the Sustainable Development Goals. There was clear concern that although the Millennium Development Goals targets were achieved in many cases, these were not achieved equally for all sections of the populations. In addition, environmental degradation was still widespread, and industrial development particularly, was taking place without adequate attention to the environment. There has been a great deal of concern also about climate change and the very need to have a form of development which is going to develop the present without compromising the future generations. Therefore, the Sustainable Development Goals came to be based upon three major premises. One, that they must be inclusive, or the principle of inclusion. This meant that no one should be left behind, and every citizen, no matter where they live, in remote islands or in dense cities, should be left behind, and therefore the development should benefit all. So inclusivity is a concept that is embedded as a governing principle of the Sustainable Development Goals. The second principle, which is embedded in all the goals, is the concept of resilience. Resilience essentially is the ability of groups and communities to cope with external stresses and disturbances as a result of social, political, and environmental change. In other words, the resilience of a community can be seen in how well it bounces back and normalcy returns, as after, for example, an earthquake, cyclones and floods, or even other kinds of human disasters such as war and conflicts. That is resilience, the ability to cope and to recover from disaster. The third concept was sustainability. Sustainability essentially is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And these three concepts together form fundamental premises which run through all of these Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals. 17 goals and 169 targets. You will find in the printed module all 17 of the goals listed separately. But what this Sustainable Development Goals agenda is essentially an overarching organizational mandate responding to real-world development challenges. The idea behind the goals is that there is coherence, that there is logic, and in terms of organizations and in the way in which we deal with stakeholders, because everybody is a stakeholder in the process of development. What this also means is that there has to be a different way of dealing with the complexities that are embedded in the principles underlying the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, operationalizing them requires a new set of skills, new sets of attitudinal changes, competencies, and knowledge. No longer will the old way of doing things in silos and sectors work. Everything has to be cross sectoral, multilateral, consultative, cooperative, and engaging all stakeholders. The integration of the three dimensions mentioned earlier, that is, inclusion, resilience, environment, must also have another dimension. That is, the integration of the three dimensions must also include the economy, the society, and the environment as critical to achieve the goals. So we're faced with a situation of great deal of complexity, of a variety of fundamental principles, as well as of cross-sectoral ways of dealing with issues. So sustainable development also needs to be inclusive, equitable, that is, equal for all people. It must be of high quality. That is, it is not merely providing access, but quality within services, and one must be accountable to the people, and it must be transparent and visible. So when we begin to look at the Sustainable Development Goals, at no point, however, are the role of ICTs explicitly stated. In the Millennium Development Goals of 2000, which were operative from 2000 until 2015, ICTs were actually emerging as transformational processes. And as transformational processes, they were placed within Goal 8 of the Millennium Development Goals, Goal 8 and Target 17. However, here in the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not explicitly stated. The UN General Assembly resolution of 2015 has clearly stated, and I quote from it, "The spread of information and communication technology and global interconnectedness has great potential to accelerate human progress, to bridge the digital divide, and to develop knowledge societies." So this is a premise upon which we look at how ICTs are embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. ICTs are also mentioned in some of the other goals. For instance, in goal number 4, which basically talks about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, target 4 of goal 4, and I quote, says, "It is required that a growth in the number of adults and young people with relevant, that is, technical and vocational skills, is a task which cannot be accomplished without the use of ICTs." In goal number 5 also, which is really in relation to women's gender equality and women's empowerment, there is a mention of ICTs in science, technology, and innovation. And in goal number 5, target 5B, which says, and I quote again, "Enhance the use of enabling technology, in particular information and communication technologies, to promote the empowerment of women." End of quote. Goal 9, which is about building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization. In Goal 9, Target 9C specifically calls for an increase in access to ICTs and to strive to provide universal internet access in the least developed countries. Finally, in goal number 17, states, which talks about in strengthening the means of implementation and revitalizing global partnerships. Within this, the target 17.6 and 17.8 charge countries with international cooperation in science, technology, and in enhancing the use of ICTs. So when we talk about information and communication technologies, which for each one of us are represented by either the mobile phone or by the desktop telephones, and represent our access to the internet and to the softwares and applications thereof. What are the features? What is it that is important of ICTs that are likely to be helpful in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? The first of these is what we call interactivity. Interactivity, that is, communication between the provider and the user of services, where the user in turn can become a generator of information. For example, in some of the social media, you will find individuals expressing their appreciation or their complaint and providing feedback in an almost instant manner to the provider of such information. So there is interactivity, the interaction between individuals, between the provider and the sender, and among individuals themselves. The other quality about ICTs that are helpful is what we call ubiquity. Ubiquity essentially means anywhere, anytime, and through any device. So it is possible to access information and knowledge. It is possible to respond through any device, anytime, that is 24/7, in any part of the world, anywhere, no matter where you are. I'm sure all of you have experienced this in your regular lives as you use devices to communicate, to learn, to keep yourselves abreast, and even now to talk through the internet to friends and families elsewhere. So, and you can do this anytime with equal quality and equal signal strength. So when we look at the capacity of the ICTs, that is the interactivity and the ubiquity, and we look at what is the possible way in which governments can use these. Imagine that if there are several sectors of development that are linked, for example, education, health, and environment, then it is possible to use ICTs as complex planning and coordination tools across various sectors to share information and to plan together. You can use ICTs to facilitate outreach and to improve delivery of services. It enables increased information sharing between departments and ministries, between levels of government, and between citizenry. And it is possible to actually monitor in a real-time basis the success or failure of initiatives and to monitor whether the initiatives are moving along as they should. This section, and this is a session summary, while I recap, let me explain to you what I have tried to convey. The human development approach, which focuses on development within a human rights framework, is the currently accepted concept. That is, rights of humans, the social welfare of humans is very important. The Sustainable Development Goals, accepted by the global community in 2015 for the period 2015 to 2030, build on the earlier Millennium Development Goals and include key ideals of inclusiveness, resilience, and sustainability. ICTs are enablers and can be used to facilitate complex planning processes, integrate approaches, and provide cost-effective, scalable solutions for key sectors of sustainable development. They are not explicitly mentioned as a separate goal. Instead, they are incorporated into several of the goals. The ICTs today are essentially like electricity, a key infrastructure without which other activities cannot take place.